think a lot of the time people with fibromyalgia think, okay, well, I don't want to exercise because I'm exhausted. I can't move. I had a phase where I couldn't even brush my hair. I was in such a bad way. But the key is to just do something. 5 minutes is all it takes. So I started by challenging myself to go on a 5-minute walk. Right. And then when 5 minutes no longer exhausted me, I increased it to 10, and so on and so on. And then I was like, maybe I'm going to go to yoga. And then I enjoyed yoga. And then my other granddad died, actually. And then I was like, I'm going to start running, because that, for me, was an outlet for my grief. And I started running, and I was like, whoa, I can run. And the great thing about movement is when you start doing it and you start noticing results, it makes you believe in your body again. And for a lot of people with fibromyalgia, they think their body's failing them. It feels like your body's failing you, and you feel like you're failing. And movement can make you believe in yourself again.
Living with fibromyalgia is incredibly challenging, and it's estimated to affect 1 in 25 of the population. It's a condition we all need to know about, to either recognise in ourselves, others around us, or to better support loved ones who are struggling with the symptoms of this condition. Today's wonderful guest, Charlotte Neal, was diagnosed in 2019 after years of not knowing what was happening to her. Charlotte is on a mission to help support others who live with the condition and inspire them to do so with positivity, and in particular talks about the key influence embracing movement has had on her daily life. Charlotte's attitude to life is a lesson to us all, hence why she's now being asked to speak regularly about her experiences and learnings. This is an enlightening conversation that has takeaways for everyone, whether fibromyalgia is a part of your life or not. In the last, I would say, 20 years of my 50-year existence, I have been aware of the term fibromyalgia. Before that, I don't think I'd even heard of it. And quite frankly, within the last 20, I haven't known that much, but I have started to know a lot more recently. I would love it if you would describe to us what your experience of fibromyalgia is, in terms of the symptoms that you have had, but also that you see in people in the communities around you.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. I think fibromyalgia is something that is becoming more common, and it is something that you're starting to hear more of. I didn't know what it was the day that I was diagnosed, and I thought, oh, I've got this rare disease. How interesting. I'd been having symptoms for about 7 years before I was diagnosed. Lots of mystery illnesses, in and out of hospital, every test under the sun that you can ever imagine. So heart scans, lung scans. I've had most of my body x-rayed. I've had lots of random mini diagnosis, but nothing that would quite pinpoint to what my mystery pain and fatigue was all about. So yeah, fibromyalgia is, as I've just said there, a chronic pain and fatigue condition. But It's a bit of a funny one, because there's like 200 different symptoms, and people can experience it on a spectrum, and they can experience lots of different symptoms along there.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a very, and that presumably is why it's so difficult to diagnose, because there's presumably massive overlaps with a whole variety of other conditions.
Yeah, and it's usually prompted by a traumatic event. So for some people, childbirth can prompt it. For others, it's an emotional traumatic event. For me, it started on the day of my granddad's funeral, which is when I can trace it back to when these weird mystery illnesses started happening. And on that day, I had so much pain in my rib cage that it felt like I'd popped a rib. And nobody could hug me at my granddad's funeral because I was in agony. And what I now understand is that I never cried when he died. So I didn't process it properly. So I think my body was storing that pain inside.
Yeah. And as we have talked about, as has come up in a whole variety of different types of this podcast, that brain-body connection, where we're almost describing it as two different things. Wonderful psychiatrist, the lifestyle psychiatrist Charlotte, actually, who was on a great name, who was on the podcast on the first series of the podcast, was talking about the fact that that comes from basically the medical world, I think about 100 years ago, separating it out as doctors to be able to deal with the brain and the nervous system, and then separately with the body. And because of that separation medically, it's then come into society as a separate entity. And yet, obviously, that example there is perfect evidence that one completely affects the other and vice versa, if you want to talk about it in those separate terms. So, and presumably you were very close to your granddad.
Yes, I was the eldest grandchild of his of 15.
Oh,
I think 14 or 15, but I lose count. And he always used to call me his favourite eldest granddaughter, which was really sweet. So yeah, I was really close to him. And it's interesting you talking there about the brain body connection and how it's not really something that we think about too much. And you going back to your earlier question about what my experience has been sort of around it, I think a lot of the time when you go to the NHS or you go to your GP and say, I've got a problem with X, it's really difficult for them to not to understand, but to think about you as a whole person holistically. And
yeah.
they tend to just drill in on that one particular symptom.
Symptom. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually kept a note in my phone of all of the different symptoms that I'd been experiencing over, I think it was a 2-month period in the end. And that's how I got referred to a rheumatologist.
I see. I mean, yeah, brilliant. And actually, that's probably great advice for anyone for almost any condition, because if your symptoms are erratic, if they seem to not be connected, as in you can't make the connection, it's still worth noting down. And I do think, although I have a bit of a thing about sort of tracking in terms of metrics to do with your health or your exercise levels and so on, tracking your symptoms, tracking how you feel is a really, really empowering thing to do, because we forget, don't we? We forget how often the thing was, when it was, how severe it was. Our memories are pretty rubbish at that. And therefore, if you've got a list and you can talk about the severity, then you're armed with so much more information for someone in healthcare. And also then you're, like you're saying, you're adding them all up for them in a sense. So you're not going in and saying, I'm having migraines. And so they start to talk about, well, maybe your eyesight or whatever else. They look at a bigger picture. And you know, they've got 10 minutes. It's really hard. And you see a random person each time. You tend to not have the old family doctor of the middle of last century, where someone really got to know you over time. So it's a real struggle for them. But yeah, that's brilliant advice.
You have to advocate for yourself. And that's the thing that can be quite challenging. And you spoke there about memory. Memory and cognitive function is one of the main symptoms of fibromyalgia, and
Right.
people call that brain fog. So for me, for example, it really affects me in lots of areas of my life, because my memory is absolutely shocking, and I get so embarrassed by it, because I can have a conversation with someone and 2 minutes later it's completely gone from my brain. 2 weeks later I won't remember ever meeting them. And that's an extreme
Wow.
example. Sometimes
Yeah.
that doesn't happen that way, and sometimes I'm fine. But if I'm in a real fibro foggy zone, that can really affect me. And then there's a whole heap of other symptoms as well. But the cognitive function and, difficulty concentrating is such a hard one, which is why advocating for yourself, making notes, is really important. Because a lot of the time you get into the doctor's surgery, you sit down and you probably feel quite tearful, because it's the first time that you've had the opportunity to sit and talk to someone about all of these awful symptoms you're experiencing. You probably feel quite nervous because you want to do yourself justice. You might cry, like I cry every time I go to the GP, but anyway, you might cry, and that can mean that you forget important details. So
Yeah.
the best way to do yourself justice is to
Yeah.
take those notes down. As much as it's annoying in the moment, we've all got a notes app on our phone. It's not
Yeah.
it's not hard to do.
And actually, this is a conversation I had with my parents just yesterday to do with an appointment. And if the doctor allows, record the conversation, because quite frankly, by the time you leave the room, you've forgotten half of what they've said, because certain
Very,
points will land with you. And you don't kind of hear the next point because you're still processing the point before. Maybe that's just my brain, but I think it's so useful to record a conversation so you can really hear objectively, and someone else can hear it and give you their opinion on it. Can I just say, so I feel like we need to drill down a bit more into symptoms. So
yeah,
can you go through kind of what happened to you before your diagnosis and the symptoms that presented initially?
yeah. Buckle in. It's a long story. So yeah, it started the day of my granddad's funeral, as I described, and then from there, it
Can I
became a
ask what age you were?
yeah. Gosh, when was that? So I was diagnosed 5 years ago. I'm 32 now. I can't do maths, so
You
I'm
can
going to
do the
leave that
maths.
bit to
27.
you. 27. I was diagnosed at 27, and I'd had symptoms for 5, 6, 7-ish years
Yeah.
before that. So it
So
probably,
early 20s.
yeah, it started in my early 20s. And
Wow.
actually, a lot of people that I speak to are in a similar boat, and it tends to be women. But yeah, that was the sort of first instant I can really pinpoint it to in my mind. And then from there, I would get all these weird mystery things that would happen. So, for example, I had glandular fever once. I would get a cold, but it would take me weeks and weeks to recover from that cold, and my whole body would hurt. I get a lot of pain in my hands. And pre-diagnosis, actually, I think it was in the summer of 2018, my hands actually seized up like this.
Oh my goodness.
And I had a massive lump come up on my hand, which I had to have injected with steroids. I had one on my foot as well, and I couldn't type because my hands were like this. And then a massive part of that for me as well was anxiety, because
Yeah.
I was worried I was going to lose my job. Luckily, I work for an incredible business. I still work for the same one I did when that happened, and they've supported me throughout it. But that was pretty terrifying, because I thought, oh my gosh, am I ever going to be able to be a normal person? Am I going to be able to work? I
Yeah.
remember one of my friends saying to me, yeah, when that happened, I thought you were going to have to leave.
And
Um,
and also potentially, when I was in pain and I was struggling with chronic pain for 4 years, it lasted. It was always about the, will I ever get beyond this thing that's happening to me right now?
yeah,
And if that something happens to you, like hand seizing up, it's absolutely human and natural to then think, well, what if something else happens like that? And what
yeah.
if, what if this is just an absolute downward trend and I'm going to just be completely stuck? Your brain naturally will go there. You can't stop it. And that anxiety I really understand.
Yeah, it's really challenging, and anxiety is both a cause and a symptom of fibromyalgia. And it's
Okay.
also very common for people to have uh, it's very common to have things like ADHD or
Mhm.
bipolar, which I have lately discovered I'm bipolar type 2.
Okay.
So neurodiversity and fibromyalgia have a lot of crossover as well as mental health. But as I said earlier, the range of symptoms that people experience is so huge. So I think it could be up to 200. And for me, I went through everything. I had heart palpitations, unable to control my body temperature, couldn't remember things, couldn't concentrate, whole body hurting. I forgot how to walk down the stairs a few times, which was terrifying, because I felt like
Mm.
I was worried that I had a brain tumor. And I remember Googling it furiously. And we should all know that Dr. Google tells you
No.
the worst case scenario.
Dr. Google says it's all over,
Well,
basically,
exactly.
pretty much always.
Exactly. And you know what? It's quite depressing when you put all of these symptoms in one big bucket, and it can really terrify you. And I think that happened to me. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's a very long story, but to cut it slightly short, so we don't bore everyone listening, I was in and out of hospital. I had lots of scans, and then eventually I did this big list of everything, and I
Mm.
went to my GP, and then I got referred to rheumatology, which was interesting because I was in the room for about 15 minutes, and they poked me everywhere, and everywhere hurt. And then they wrote fibromyalgia and spelt it wrong on a piece of paper which they'd ripped off the back of an envelope, and then said, we'll send you a letter. And that was it.
It's a bit like the stories I hear where someone that they know and love is wheeled into a ward or down a corridor, and they start seeing posters that have, I won't say what, but a condition on that they've not been told about that could be relevant for their loved one, and they're hoping the loved one's not seen it.
Yeah.
It's not good. It's not good. But it is the way it is. I'm
Mm.
not here to criticize, because I think the NHS is fantastic in
It is.
so many ways, but there are failings in the system, as we all know. And yeah, that's not good. And I had a tricky time myself. But yeah. So then you went home and waited, or you Googled fibromyalgia at that point and
Well, I
said, what
Googled
is
it.
this?
Yeah, I Googled it with the wrong spelling and couldn't find anything, and thought I had a rare disease. I'm quite a practical, pragmatic person, and I'm very goal orientated. So I remember that day I started my Instagram account, Fibromyalgia Girl, because I went on Instagram and couldn't find anyone that I could relate to. And that's not to say that anyone's doing anything wrong. It's just that I'm a positive person. I'm goal orientated, and I wanted to find out how I could help myself. And a
Mm.
lot of what I found online made me feel like my life was over, and that really scared me.
Yeah.
So I remember doing that, and just thinking, well, something good has to come out of this, and this is how I'm going to make that good for myself. So yeah.
That's incredible that you did that at that stage, given that you'd only just found out that
Yeah.
what the thing was. But I suppose, given that you'd been suffering with it, I don't know if you like to use that word or not. I don't know what the right
Living
word
with.
is. Living with. There we
Yeah.
go. I knew it was wrong, but I thought, I'm happy to make mistakes.
No right or wrong. It's just a fact.
Yes, exactly. But you'd been living with it for so long
Yeah,
that actually this already was your reality. You just now had a name for it.
exactly. And it gave me context rather for my existence,
Hmm.
It was something that I'd been struggling with. I was really struggling. And, I didn't need to wait for that letter to come through. I knew, and it all made sense. And when I eventually figured it out that it wasn't spelt that way because someone pointed it out to me and said, why have you spelt it like this? It's spelt like this. I went, oh, okay.
It's tricky spelling. It is tricky spelling.
It is a
I had to have a
tricky
try myself. Yeah, fair enough.
And then the penny dropped and I was like, okay, this makes sense. But again, yeah, I couldn't find anything that necessarily related. But it's a difficult one. It is a difficult one. But I didn't need to wait for that because I had the confirmation.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes there is relief just knowing that there is a thing that, you're not, you are like others,
Yeah.
because no one wants to be the one with the thing that no one knows what it is. So there's a usefulness in that, but we'll come back to the negativity, that you found about it, because I think that's an interesting subject area. And I love your positive attitude and your outlook, and that's what's so inspiring, and that's why you're on here.
Thank you.
So tell me more about your daily life now, both in terms of your home life and your work life.
Sure. So in terms of my home life, I'm a very sociable person. I have a lot of family and a lot of friends, and I like to go out and about. I do plan a lot, but I also plan time for rest. I live alone with my very old cat, which she's here somewhere, with my very old cat. Um, but for me, home is my peace. It is my tranquil zone. I
Okay.
love nothing more than cuddling up, reading a book, which makes me sound really boring, but I love it so much.
No.
But I'm a bit of a converted party girl. So I have spent my 20s partying quite hard and enjoying it. I think probably, if I'm honest, as a bit of an escape. And I've very recently turned a corner where I've actually been sober 89 days today. So
Ah,
that means
congratulations.
thank you. But that means my home life is a little bit different now because I'm not doing
Yeah.
all. I'm learning what I like again. And then in terms of work, I'm a community builder in work. I work in a HR tech company. So I spend my time speaking with our clients, our prospective clients, and that's also a very sociable job. And that's just who I am as a person. I actually trained as a journalist and did that for 5 years. And then I got really sick, which I now know was a bipolar episode mixed with fibromyalgia. So quite a difficult time.
Mm.
And I just thought, I can't do this. I can't do something that doesn't make me feel good. So that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing now. That was a really long answer. Sorry.
No, not at all. But and so you just described it initially, and in your summary was basically chronic pain and chronic fatigue. So the tiredness and the spells of pain. So how does that affect your work particularly? Because presumably you have to respond to that.
Yeah, so I'm incredibly lucky that my employer has let me go on this like journey, and when I speak about it, I call it a journey of discovery and recovery. And I think of chronic health as a bit of like a wheel where you get symptoms, discovery, recovery, and you might journey through that wheel lots of times, or you might just do it once. And for me, I've journeyed through that wheel 6 times in 6 years, and they've supported me every step of the way. So, through polycystic ovaries, through a tremor, through chronic migraines where I was on my sofa for 3 weeks, there's my symptoms ebb, flow, and change all the time. And that is the nature of fibromyalgia. And the way I respond to it in the context of work is that I have educated my employer and I
Mm.
have a really good bond with my manager where they understand what I'm dealing with because I have told them, not in an emotional way, but in a practical way. Here's me.
Yeah.
This is what I might sometimes need.
And what would those might sometimes need things that you request be. So I'm thinking of someone else in the same position as you who has
Yeah.
found out this is the mystery thing they haven't known they've had for ages, and they have hopefully got a compassionate employer.
Yeah.
What would you help them to advocate for themselves to ask for?
Yeah, such a good question. Again, because of the nature of symptoms, it can be different from person to person. But my big thing is space and flexibility. So I wake up some days and I can't move, and it doesn't happen very often anymore, thankfully. But when it did, I had this system with my manager, which was a scale of 1 to 5, and I could send him a number on the scale, 1 being I'm terrible, 5 being I'm on top of the world. And he would know, okay, today's a 1 day. Maybe
Mm.
I need to cover some stuff for her, or maybe, I need to step in. And that is free, really simple, really easy to do, but also removes burden off people. So I would say that flexibility and space is the main thing. When my hand seized up, they got recording equipment for me so that I could dictate, which was,
Wow.
yeah, amazing.
And I say wow, but it shouldn't be wow.
It shouldn't be wow, it should be the norm.
No, because if you had, I suppose the wow feels like because of the erratic nature. So they've got to be adaptable
Yes.
for your changing needs. Whereas someone who comes in with a condition, where they need help with this, or they need to have a certain desk set up or whatever, that's kind of like a one-off, and this is the way that we work. Whereas it feels more wow because they are adapting and changing with you. But that should be the case for everyone, in the sense that all of our energies, you've clearly got a lot more to deal with, so I am not denigrating that at all.
No,
I'm
no.
just meaning by comparison that for an employer,
Yeah.
that's the best way to get the best out of your employees, because you're working with them and you're working with their energy flow, and hopefully it's reciprocated because you feel sort of heard and seen. Just taking a quick pause because I want to tell you about a new offer exclusively for listeners of this podcast. If you'd like to improve your mobility, strength, and learn more about moving well in daily life now and to train for your 90s, come and move with me in the Reclaim Movement membership. There's weekly live coaching in term time with hundreds of replays available, as well as hordes of 5 and 10-minute mini movement videos to follow throughout your day. I'm offering you a 15% discount on your first month's membership on top of the 7-day free trial. Go to reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to create your account and quote the code podcast15. Let's move together to feel better and keep doing all the things you love. But what if your employer can't really help you in that way because you are in a job where you can't ebb and flow like that? How do you help people to advocate for themselves in that situation?
It's really difficult, because I think a lot of the time we go for careers based on the career itself, and we don't always think about our lifestyle. And a lot of the time, the lifestyle is actually more important because it enables you to do your best work if you're in a lifestyle that suits you and suits your needs. So it's really tough to say to people, consider changing and to consider changing careers. But health is wealth. I think health has to come first. And if, it's like people with partners, right? We don't all have one soulmate. I truly believe that there are multiple people out there in the world that, we can get along with really well. And I think it's the same with careers. And it's really hard because you might be in a shift job, or might be a teacher. I speak to a lot of teachers, and that's not necessarily the most flexible. And you have to ask yourself, well, what's the most important thing to me? And yeah, you might grieve for that career and for changing it, but what you won't grieve is looking after yourself. So
Yeah.
I think that you have to have a really honest conversation with yourself, which can be hard to do, especially when you're living with such intense symptoms, which are life changing. It is life changing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that moves me on to treatment, because there's knowing your symptoms, knowing what's happening, but what can you do to help yourself? I know that you've talked, not today, but another time, about some types of medication. But the big one that obviously I want to talk about is the role that movement plays in your life, because hearing the way you're talking about it, knowing others around me that have chronic fatigue, and understanding the complexity of a relationship with movement, in this situation is one that's really worth talking about, because I know that you've got a lot to say on the subject. So if we could start with medication and then move to movement.
Yeah, sure. So medication's a funny one. I think it serves a purpose, but I think that in days gone by, people expected medication to be the answer. And unfortunately, we can't expect people and we can't expect pills to fix us. We have to look inward and look at our lifestyle and look at the factors that we can control. And actually, I think that's a really empowering take to have on it, that medication can aid me in my recovery or in my management, and it does. I take amitriptyline, and I also take a mood stabilizer called lamotrigine, and I take lamotrigine for bipolar, amitriptyline for chronic migraines and for pain.
Yeah.
It's a low dose. I take 25 milligrams a day, but you
And
can't.
that's a mild antidepressant, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, amitriptyline is an antidepressant, and I've been on that since I was diagnosed. I've had to increase my dose because of the increase in pain and also chronic migraines rearing their head. But medication on its own isn't going to do the job. And for me, my sort of journey of discovery and recovery has really been influenced positively by movement. And I didn't move a lot before. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't want to. I didn't see the benefit of it, and it wasn't something that I'd necessarily been taught. So, and I think that's what happens with a lot of people. So for me, the most powerful tool I have in my fibromyalgia toolkit is movement. And I had an amazing PT, a guy called Ben Davey, who worked with me for a couple of years. And his catchphrase, and I have to quote him for it because I can't steal it, is "movement is medicine."
Yeah.
And I think
I'm not sure that's entirely his, but yes.
Maybe it's not his, but that's where I first heard it.
But it's a good one, particularly in your situation and with reference to treatment and having just discussed medication. Absolutely, because it's not always seen as having similar effects. But that's what you're wanting to say.
Yeah, it has an even bigger effect than medication. Medication is the little backbone. But actually, the thing that makes me flourish is all of the other stuff, and exercise is the main one. And I think a lot of the time people with fibromyalgia think, okay, well, I don't want to exercise because I'm exhausted. I can't move. I had a phase where I couldn't even brush my hair. I was in such a bad way. But the key is to just do something. 5 minutes is all it takes. So I started by challenging myself to go on a 5-minute walk. Right. And then when 5 minutes no longer exhausted me, I increased it to 10, and so on and so on. And then I was like, maybe I'm going to go to yoga. And then I enjoyed yoga. And then my other granddad died, actually. And then I was like, I'm going to start running, because that for me was an outlet for my grief. And I started running, and I was like, whoa, I can run. And the great thing about movement is when you start doing it and you start noticing results, it makes you believe in your body again. And for a lot of people with fibromyalgia, they think their body's failing them. It feels like your body's failing you, and you feel like you're failing. And movement can make you believe in yourself again.
Yeah, wonderful. Absolutely singing to my tune. And I think what's important is the message of just trying something and it being small amounts, but and presumably when you are exhausted, it's also really important to rest, to help your body in recovery. And pushing too hard is never going to particularly do any favors, but knowing whether there's a true barrier there, or one, as you say, that is coming perhaps from a place of fear and lack of confidence, and gently nudging against that, which is the same in lots of different conditions, whether they are just structural, or whether it's something more chronic, like you have. So yeah, I think that's really, really key. And how do you create that balance between what's enough, what's making you feel good, and rest?
That's such a good question. And a lot of the time people say, well, how do I know when to push through the barrier? Or where do I know where my barrier is? What if trying this makes me have a flare up? And the answer to that question is, it probably will. And you have to get comfortable with that uncomfortableness, because as horrible as it is to go into a fibromyalgia flare up, if I'm having a flare up because I've tried something that helps myself, I'm not mad about that. It's annoying, granted, but you've not lost anything, because this is the condition you're dealing with anyway. So I think that's a really key thing. But also, when you're fatigued and you need to rest, knowing the difference between I'm actually fatigued and am I fatigued but I could do something
Yeah.
is something that you will only learn from trying. I've done it
Yes.
so many times where I've gone, I'll be fine. I'm not fine. I'm on the sofa for a day afterwards. But like I said, I'm not mad because I tried. And I
Yeah.
think starting small and building up over time means that you give your body time to adjust, and so that it's not this big shock to the system. If I went and did a 2 hour swim session now, I'd be a mess afterwards because I don't do that regularly. So it's about giving yourself a bit of grace and patience.
Exactly, and that's kind of like that's very normal. People can't expect to suddenly jump into something having not done it before,
Yeah,
and there's often an expectation that, you know, we should be able to do the things, for example, that we used to do. But if we haven't made those patterns and shapes with our bodies, or used the heart in that way and so on, it's always going to be trickier to get there. And I really resonate with what you're saying about flare-ups, because I would be, when I had my pain, I would be so frustrated with my body, and I would try something more, but and then I would have a flare up, and it could like be 3 days where I was absolutely beating myself up for doing it. And then when I got to the point where I realized, okay, actually that's information, and that
yeah,
information is powerful, because I can know, okay, that was too far, but I need to get, what point can I get to with my body where I'm nearer that, where it's not creating a flare up, or not so bad a flare up, and actually is benefiting me. And therefore that's a gift, because then you can build back. And I always talk about the sort of the recovery, of particularly of a physical chronic pain situation, when it's particularly when it's musculoskeletal, that you are literally down and up. It is a wavy line. And
yeah.
if you're lucky, that's gradually going upwards. But only through the ups and downs do you see that gradual upwards line, and only effectively by looking backwards. You don't feel it at the time, but it's trying to stand back to see the line. That
Yes.
that objectivity is what's helpful to then make the right decisions, knowing, yeah, this is good for me, but as you say, it doesn't feel great perhaps always, or it's slightly uncomfortable, but I know that actually if I'm just pushing a little bit, it might make me feel a little bit better. And
The only way
then,
out is through. The only way out is
yes,
through. Sorry to
yes,
cut you off, but
no,
I
absolutely.
I think you're so spot on and you're so right. When you zoom out on the graph, where are you at compared to where you started? And actually, I think people get so lost in the muddle of fibro, it's hard to actually take stock and say, no, I've done a
Yeah.
good job in managing this. And one of the things that helped me the most was keeping a diary of when I started this. And I kept a diary of symptoms, exercise, food, stress, and sleep.
Right.
And they're all the main factors that contribute to good fibromyalgia management. And for me, having that journal, having that diary and being able to look back and go, oh, well, I did 5 minutes in the beginning and now I'm doing 25. Actually, that's a really big leap, gave me that confidence. And I think a lot of the time people feel ashamed that they're living with this. Like, why has this happened to me? And you look back on old versions of yourself with shame for what you didn't know. So being able to look back in a journal and go, oh no, actually, I was more badass than I thought is a pretty cool thing. And actually, so the day I was diagnosed, I wrote in my journal, I'm going off piste here, I'm sorry, but
No.
I wrote, I can do this, I will, in my journal the day I was diagnosed, determined to feel well again. I can do this, I will. And I actually got I can do this, I will tattooed down my neck last year because I found the diary again by chance. And I was thinking, oh, I was this person that was useless and rubbish and I felt really ashamed. And then I read that and I thought, no,
No.
actually, that's empowering. So I think that can really help people to acknowledge the progress they're making.
And even zooming in on a daily basis, yeah, okay, today's been a bad day.
Yeah,
You're relieving yourself of that. You're saying it to someone. It's there. It's sort of out. Equally, if you've had a good day, look at me, and applauding yourself for what you've done, especially if you've done a little bit more,
yeah,
so that you're telling your brain, I can do this. And I think that is that external recognition, and then you being able to look back and read it is really, really important and powerful, because we can just get so, as I was saying before, we can get so lost in our thoughts. Our memories are pretty poor at tracking things and knowing where we really are at. And obviously you can get into that really sort of negative place about it. So yeah, no, it's always brilliant advice, I think, to be more in touch with what's actually going on. And a lot of this conversation actually is making me think about perimenopause, which is where I am in. And there's a lot of crossover in terms of the incredible myriad of symptoms that you wouldn't necessarily associate with just the fact that your hormone levels are declining, until you know about it, until you have that awareness. And actually, again, tracking it, really, really important to be able to then share that with a healthcare provider. So we're completely off track, but there's so many different situations in life where, as you say, to be able to advocate for ourselves, we need to almost provide ourselves with the evidence, so that we're like, yeah, this is actually happening. It's real. And I believe it. So I'm going to go and make sure that you do. So yeah, and also my pain situation as well, where I just thought I was making it all up. I just couldn't understand was it just me. And that's horrible. And you were probably in that situation for a long time, particularly with the fact that your symptoms were so erratic and different. So there wasn't this perfect, oh, I've now got migraines and I can't get rid of them and so on. It's been ages. You were having different things going on. And that's a really difficult place to be.
And it still is like that. My symptoms still are erratic. I never know what I'm going to get. Like today, my Garmin said I woke up on a body battery of 15 out of 100. Well, I've done 3 exercise classes this week. I've walked, I've got sun on my face, I've done all the right things. And sometimes you will do all the right things and it just won't be okay. And that is fine. It ebbs and it flows. But movement is that thing that I always come back to, because it's the thing that keeps me sane. It's the thing that keeps me on a good trajectory. If I can manage a baseline that's pretty healthy through good movement, then I know I'm going to do okay. But it's natural.
And I totally agree, for anyone
Yeah.
at all. I think that's a mantra for life. So tell us about your work that you're doing outside of your work, your day job, to help in the fibromyalgia community.
Yeah, so I mentioned before about starting my Instagram page, and I started the day I was diagnosed because I decided I didn't want anyone to feel the way that I'd felt on that day. I was convinced that my life was going to be over, but determined that it wouldn't be. And I just wanted to highlight that it's possible to live a full and happy life while also managing fibromyalgia. And I think a lot of people will hear that statement and think, whoa, how have you got to that place? But I've decided that that's what I want to do. And yeah, there are times where it's difficult, but I document that and I show the real side of it, and I also show the positive side of it. And I think it's really important to have a balance of the two. And I just wanted to be really open with people and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. I see you, I hear you, I'm with you. There are plenty of us here. But what I won't ever do is wallow or be overly negative about it, because actually for people living with fibromyalgia, that doesn't serve you, because that fuels anxiety, which makes it worse. So I'm doing that. I have dreams of starting my own charity, but I'm such a busy girl that I haven't quite got there yet. But I've started fundraising, which is great. So the charity will be called Fibro Futures.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, and the tagline will be building better futures for people living with fibromyalgia. And I want to do that through exercise, awareness, education, access, and then nutritional advice, counselling, all of that stuff, and give people access to treatments which they may not be able to afford. I think it's wrong that people who earn more money are able to manage their conditions better. So that's what I want to do. And I've also started doing public speaking about managing chronic conditions in the workplace. So educating employers on how to support their employees.
Oh, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And goes straight to where it's potentially needed most, because obviously that's one of the hardest areas for when there's a lack of knowledge, lack of awareness. So, an awareness building, as you're doing today, is absolutely brilliant. And I'm sure will really help the community that you've built on Instagram, but I'm sure you're going to go on to build even more by the sounds of it. And I think we need people like you to be as positive as you can in the light of something really difficult, because surely it helps. It helps you live a better life, have a better quality of life. It probably helps people around you so that they can support you better. And yeah, I'm sure it's something that really has helped with your condition.
Yeah, it really has. And having a community of people is a beautiful thing, whether they're virtual or in person. It helps you feel less alone, and it helps you feel seen and understood, because it can be a bit of a mystery sometimes. So navigating it with people by your side is always a good thing.
So that, I presume that's your leaving bit of advice, is if you find yourself in this situation, to find someone or reach out to you.
Yeah, or reach out to me I'm on Instagram, fibromyalgia girl. And I blog for WebMD, so there's loads of blogs on there that you can read about managing it properly. But yeah, I think that would be my parting piece of advice. Find people like you. There's safety in numbers. We're all in it together.
Ah, that's brilliant. And we will link to those in the show notes. So fibromyalgia girl is obviously nice and easy to remember, but maybe some of your articles or something that would be really useful for people to read, so that they can get some more detailed help.
Yeah, I've written a lot about exercise, so I'll include those ones. But yeah,
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on, Charlotte. Thank you for your time. Really, really grateful. And it was lovely to sort of meet you.
Yeah, you too, Wendy. Thank you for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.